Okay, welcome to Why Is This Good? A podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine, and I'm here with Rob and John.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
This week, we're going to share a story that I chose. It's called Girls at Play, and it's by Celeste, and I don't know how to pronounce her last name.
Ng, I think.
It's Ng. I picked this because I recently read Little Fires Everywhere, so it's a book she did, and I read that because it was based in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a team that we ran against in high school track. That was my interest, okay? That's where that stems from. And I saw the short story and I thought this would be good. So I'm going to read starting from the beginning of this short story. This is how we play the game. Pink means kissing, red means tongue, green means up your shirt, blue means down his pants, purple means in your mouth, black means all the way. We play the game at recess and the teachers don't notice. We stand on the playground by the flagpole, arms ringed with colored bracelets from the drugstore, waiting. The boys come past us in a bunch, all elbows, laughing. They pretend not to look. We pretend not to see them. One of them reaches out and snaps a bracelet off of one of us, breaking it like a rubber band, fast and sharp as plucking a guitar string. He won't look back. He'll walk back the way he came, along the edge of the football field, and whoever he picked, Angie or Carrie or Mandy, will watch him go. After a minute, she'll follow him and meet him under the bleachers far down the field where the teachers can't see. We play the game every day. In 8th grade, we're too old for foursquare and tetherball and kickball. It doesn't have a name, this game, and we don't talk about it, even when we're by ourselves after school, the boys gone off to football or paper routes or hockey, and no teachers around. But the game has rules. You go with the boy who snaps your bracelet. You don't pick the boy, he picks you. They're all the same to you. You do exactly what the color prescribes, even if you hate him, like we hate Travis Coleman, whose fingernails are always grubby. No talking other than hello. Don't tell anyone if you hate it, if his tongue feels like a dead fish in your mouth, if his hands leave snail trails of sweat down your sides. No talking with the boys outside of the game. No talking about it afterwards. No laughing, no anything, even if it's just the three of us. Pretend it never happened. Rub the dent on your arm, the red welt where the bracelet snapped and split, until it goes away. I think that's good. So like I said, I picked it because I knew this author, and I wasn't a huge fan of the book of hers that I read. Have you guys read it?
No, I picked it up in the bookstore once, and I started it, and I was like, oh, this is good. And then,
yeah. I wasn't blown away by it or anything. I finished it because I felt like I had to. But I think what she did really well, the writing was always beautiful in the book, and I think the writing is beautiful in the short story. I just wasn't necessarily interested in the plot of that book, but I was interested in the plot of this short story. And I think what she did well in both was capture middle school, and especially what it's like to be that age and to be a girl. And a lot of her stuff seems like sort of loosely autobiographical. Both this and the novel were set in a Cleveland suburb, which is kind of cool just because I like to read that and recognize those names. But it lends itself to a kind of like expertise on this era and place and culture. So I didn't play this game in middle school, but there are definitely
Does
things.
This exist?
I don't know. I remember these bracelets and news stories about these bracelets, but
oh, no kidding. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it is real in Cleveland, but I think she did a real good job of kind of tiptoeing the line between that age where you're really naive and when you're just starting to learn about these things, and then when you're just starting to do these things, but you're too young to be doing these things, but you understand sort of the cultural implications, at least in your little school, of doing them. And the story goes on to introduce, obviously, this new girl in town and how she's so innocent, and then how she learns about the game and how that changes her. So without any spoilers, that's pretty much the arc of it. But it starts with the game and it ends with the game. So that's what I thought she did well. I don't know if you guys kind of heard any truth to that, if you remember middle school.
Mine was
a long
different
time
than
ago.
that. I thought the interesting thing about the bracelets for me was because I thought it was made up, and I thought it was really imaginative and a great idea to start a story with, where you're kind of you're detailing this ritual, and you're doing it at eye level, so to speak, so that you're there with these kids as they're doing it, just by kind of nature of the way that this person writes and kind of sets up these simple sentences, and you're doing it with them. We do this. She's speaking in the second person plural, right? First person plural, excuse me. Yeah. And which I really liked. And then you're still with them at eye level. And then once we started getting into the background, that's where I started. It just felt like I kind of knew what this story was, and I didn't know what it was when I'm kind of being explained it without. She's just completely showing the game to you to start with, which Christine read, which that was easily my favorite part. And I thought it was going to be a different type of story.
Yeah.
I thought we were just going to follow them and just kind of watch it unfold, which is, whether it's personal preference, that's what I like to see. I don't really like a lot of background in story, which when you guys listen to the next episode, you're going to see why with the story that I chose. Like, I just like to see action, just show it to me. I mean, not the show and tell thing, but I want to see it happen. And I don't mind a little narrative kind of sprinkled in with the narrator injecting herself. But I thought kind of there was too much of the narrator here, too much of the we, where I'm kind of waiting to get back to, well, just put me in the situation and let me figure out for myself. And I like the story because it, like Christine said, there is a lot of truth to it. But I was hoping just to kind of stay there with the kids and not with, it felt, once we got into, Christine stopped at a good place, because once we get into the next paragraphs, then you kind of feel like an adult reading it. There's kind of you kind of step back and you feel a little removed from it.
Like it's almost told in some kind of hindsight where you can understand the situation at that age.
It's really subtle too, because, you know, obviously the tense isn't changing. She's still speaking the first person plural. We're still doing this. But once you're not there, like on the ground level with these kids, there's kind of an immediacy or an intensity that just kind of evaporated for me.
It does shift, and I wasn't a huge fan of the shift. So to Rob's point, we start here where the narrator's kind of laying out what the game is and what it looks like and how it's played. And then, like I said, they introduce this new character, and that's when it becomes a story that you didn't necessarily anticipate. I thought she did do a good job by the end of kind of coming back around to the game as a sort of explanation for why she started there. But I know what you mean. Yeah. Did you like it, John?
Oh yeah, that was really well done. I didn't respond the same way to that. I did feel that shift though, and it was more, you know, it's one of those, like we talked about in previous episodes, where you put down the background material, but you make that interesting, and then you get into the scene eventually, because the whole first section ends with "This is how we are," when Grace moves to town. And that sets up, now we're going to get into who's Grace? What happens when Grace shows up? Which is what the story is. So, I don't know. I liked it. I did like it.
By the end, I liked it. I didn't feel some huge payoff with the end of the story, but I was thinking about it after I read it, which is usually a good sign for me of whether I liked it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with the ending either.
Yeah, the ending's really ambiguous, and I think it's supposed to be, obviously, but it was almost wasn't satisfying, because I wanted to know and appreciate what the particular shift was for Grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is the story about, is it Grace's story, or is it the we story? I think there's that might be why I wasn't sure what to do. Like, am I here for Grace, or am I here for the other girls? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if we should, I don't want to give a spoiler, but it's about...
Well, people should have read.
You should have done your homework.
Spoil it.
Paul Gill. But so it's all about how Grace is almost alien to this culture, and they introduce her slowly, but they try not to ruin her because they recognize their younger selves in her, and they realize that she's pure, and they're fascinated by her fascination with things. And when she finds out about the game, they're like, oh no, what do we do? They withhold it. And she threatens not to be friends with them, because at that point she's like kind of wising up. And when she finally plays it, then at the end the narrator does that thing which, like, sometimes they pull it off well. Like, it kind of reminded me almost of that story that you chose, Rob, where the guy gets shot in the head and the narrator says, like, this is not what he thought about, not what he thought about, not what he thought about.
Yeah.
Bullet in the brain.
Yeah, that was, we talked about expertly done. This was kind of like, she could have thought this, she could have thought that, she could have done this when it happened or this when it happened, and we don't get the answer, but it's all less satisfying, because in my mind, each of those potential outcomes has a totally different ramification for her, right? Like, either she does go with the boy and she does what he says, or she doesn't, and that marks something different for her, or she remembers it this way or that way, or and to John's point, we're not hearing this from Grace's perspective, we're hearing it from the girl's perspective, and so it's like, well, is the point that regardless innocence was lost, and that's the takeaway, or is it the particulars of what happened? You know, that's why it felt like kind of a cop-out.
Yeah, I mean, it might be the case that that's more of the denouement than the real ending is when they force the bracelets onto her.
Right.
I mean, that's because that's their action. That's what they do at the end of the story.
Yeah. So there's that section, if you read it, where it says we grab her by the shoulders and we force her down, first onto her knees, then into the grass. And they're pulling the bracelets off their arms and shoving them onto hers. And that feels like the scene that we're not shown with the boys, right? That feels like a rape scene.
Yeah, that was really powerful.
Yeah.
That's a good point, John. Maybe she should have ended there.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we talked about how many endings stories have. I think it was for Bullet in the Brain. We talked about that.
Yeah, because I didn't like the ending that he had. It's interesting that we take such part into endings. It's like, no, you have to do it this way. It's not the middle or the beginning. I don't know. When I'm thinking about my stories, I sweat the beginning more than anything. The ending always seems like, oh, of course it's going to come here. But
that's true.
I find beginnings to be way more troublesome. I didn't mind this ending. I just didn't love the story, so that's probably why I didn't mind it.
Yeah, Rob's like, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
Good enough.
It's a fine ending to a fine story.
It's just, we've heard this story, the innocence lost with the so many times. So to start it off in such a cool, weird way, and then to be like, it's almost like watching Clueless or something. We're going to take the girl in. It was like, I've seen that a million times.
That's a really good point.
I have not seen bracelets with kids taking them. It was this had like a weird, sex fetish ritual that Illuminati weird thing where there's people standing there, they're quiet, they're holding out their arm. There was just something really ancient feeling about it. It was just weird. And it was totally cool because it's set in middle school. And whether or not it's happened, it was just such a startling image. And then just to go to this really kind of we see this on the Oxygen Channel.
I think you nailed it right there. Because I did when I realized we were going to be hearing about Grace for a while, I kind of sat back and was like, all right, guess I got to read this. But I was hoping and waiting for the bracelets to come back. Not just because she set up an expectation, but because that was the most interesting part.
Yep.
And you're right. We've seen girls grow up and yeah, I think you're right. I didn't really think I was bored, but I was just kind of meh about it. But maybe it is because this is a very familiar arc.
It's interesting sometimes to sort of monitor how you feel during a story. And I don't know if I necessarily do this, but I've certainly thought about how will the reader feel when he's reading mine or she's reading this or whatever. So, but yeah, there's a point and there's when you get jacked during a story when whether it's the action or the writing, whatever, it's a physical reaction as much as being this is what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe a good way, since this podcast is called, what is this podcast called? Why Is It Good?
Knife to my heart, Rob.
Just kidding. Maybe to remember, ask yourself, all right, is this good as you're reading? So am I enjoying this? Am I having fun?
You said too, it's a physical reaction. I, when I was little, I loved Dave Barry and he was in the paper and I would read his stuff and I would think this is so funny. And then I would insist upon watching one of my family members read it. And when I show someone a movie or a TV show that I've seen that they haven't, I'm watching them. And with the Dave Barry stuff, though, the fact that it was written, it's people do have a physical response, not just because it's humor, but you can tell when people get bored, when they shift their weight or when they're literally at the edge of their seats, fixed. And maybe that's a good kind of takeaway for this. Not necessarily what to mimic, but read your stuff aloud to someone and see if they're bored out of their skull.
Yeah, check your pulse when you're reading.
Yeah, and your own. Yeah, when you're reading your own stuff, maybe you're a bad judge, but I absolutely know when I'm boring a reader or a listener because I've done it.
That may be the reason why I didn't get excited about her book. She's probably not listening, so
sorry, Celeste.
But I remember being I liked the book cover. I liked that she was young. I liked that it was a new book. It had a lot of cool blurbs on it. I was like, oh, cool, this sounds good. It had a good title. What was the title called?
Little Fires Everywhere.
That's an awesome title. But then you just started reading it, and I was like, it had and then wasn't it sort of a background of a family with there's a sister and there's is that anywhere close to it?
Yeah, so there's a family that's new to town, and they meet their rich landlord and
whatever story that was. I was like, oh, I know that story.
Yeah.
So I put the book down.
You're right. And okay, so here's another critique of the novel that none of us read. She does the same thing where she lays out a premise that's familiar, like I just described, new girl to town. But the plot of the book, I remember, did not start until halfway through. And the plot was out of left field. It ends up being about a woman who gives her daughter up for adoption and then wants her back. And those characters weren't even introduced at the beginning. And it almost feels like Grace kind of dropping in on this short story.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if any critics have noted that.
The three of us.
Well, she seems big time, isn't she? This is
oh, yeah.
Didn't she win an award for that?
Probably. I don't know.
She got shortlisted for something big.
Yeah, she's well known and everybody likes her stuff. But yeah, maybe that's why this wasn't one of these winners. Is there anything that we can say that's nice?
I thought we did say nice stuff. There's a lot of power here.
Okay.
There's tons of it. I mean, that's the first page on this printout, and then the bracelet rape thing was crazy. And then Grace is an interesting character too. I mean, I like the character. I just don't want to see them put in the same thing again. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't mind like archetypes if you can like dress them up, put a mustache on it, but to make it do something different, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that even if the plot is tired, the way it's accomplished is good, right? Like she writes well.
Oh, sure.
She does it really well.
The writing's flawless.
Yeah. So there are things that we could like learn from this. Like how do you accomplish something? Even like little turns of phrase, like nice little metaphors and stuff like that. What was that? That one about fur, putting on the
like the makeup on her eye
yeah,
makeup?
putting on the eye makeup, and then she said something like that. It was good.
I did like the kind of tone of voice with the, like, Grace is the only one with actual speaking parts, and we is the collective we, the girls. I think that lends itself to what Rob was talking about, this like ritual, this tribal sort of ancient thing where it's like we decide this, like the elders almost.
There's this on the PDF we're going to link to is page 72. There's a paragraph from all the way across the blacktop. We can see that everything, etc. I'm sorry, I should say, from all the way across the blacktop, we can see that everything about her is wrong. This reminded me of that story we did a while back, When They Came to Us. Yeah. It's that same we, and it's like that scene we talked about where the girls are peeking in at the alien, and her shirt is too big. She's tiny and it's huge and hangs on the way that she's being described is that same othering technique that we talked about for that. And the we thing here, it actually reminded me, because it's the three girls become we, and there's other girls. They're referred to as the other girls most of the time, and other people by name, like teachers and stuff. But this reminded me of a science fiction story novel called by Werner Vinge, Fire Upon the Deep, where there's an alien race. They're called the Tynes, and I think that's because like the Tynes are individual members of a collective
fork.
Yeah, like a fork. Tines of a fork. A fork is a single collective thing, and the individual members of that thing, they're individual, but they're part of a whole, right? So in that story, it follows from their point of view as being a collective individual. So they have one consciousness, one mind, one state of understanding, but it's collected among an individual pack, or among individuals of a pack. And so that kind of reminded me of this, where she writes it from we. So everything that they say, everything they do is always we this, we that. But there's a couple of moments here and there where once Angie stole a black Sharpie, right? And that's one member of the we did that thing. And a couple of other moments where their names are used like 3 or 4 times throughout the whole thing, so it's not very often. Like when they were stealing the makeup, Angie slides a deep red lipstick into her jeans pocket. Carrie tucks a pack of Twizzlers up the sleeve of her shirt. Mandy pops a bottle of nail polish under the tongue of her sneaker. Then finally, Grace pulls the pink and green tube of mascara from its package and tucks it down the neckline of her sweater. And even the way that's done there, the parallel constructions of name of girl, verb, name of girl, action that she does to steal something, Grace falls into that same parallel, so she's joining the pack in a way there. Although that's undermined a few sentences later when Grace doesn't look at us, where she's being separated again.
Does that section have an I, like first person?
No, there's never an I. Never I. It's always... So I is always... Look, we is the only first person. Whenever they talk about an individual member, it's third person. It's Mandy does this. Angie does that.
Because I was going to say, even though it says we, it does feel like it's coming from one girl who has really, really bought into this we are a unit thing.
And it might be just I felt like it was a shifting personality, like the group personality. And it could have been Angie speaking in one moment and Mandy speaking in another moment.
That's cool to think about.
But they're representing themselves as the group. And even when Grace talks to them, it's Grace told us. It's not like Grace leaned in close to Mandy and whispered blah, blah, blah. It's Grace came up to us. We're always a 3-headed monster.
It sort of reminded me of the When They Came to Us the blues, like you said, because there's that other aspect, but then the idea too that she came to them in a way that they thought was kind of perfect or unique or special. And then over time, she turns into something that they were not okay with. Like she morphed into this monster, kind of like these alien creatures went from being mostly benign to annoying to they've got to go and we're going to kill them.
What did she morph into? She morphed into them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I was like I was wondering what my takeaway was supposed to be. Is this supposed to be like a story of what your mom thinks when she sees you as a teenager? Like I've never heard this perspective where other teenagers lament lost innocence of a peer.
Oh, that's interesting.
These stories are usually told like as a rite of passage, not as, aren't you sorry this happened to you? Because it happened to me. I don't know.
There's also this moment, well, in the first couple pages when she's setting everything up, they're talking about the game and they say, we aren't stupid or high. We don't do it because we don't know better. And it isn't hormones either. If you asked us, we couldn't explain, but it has something to do with their stares. And she goes on and talks about showing a bunch of little vignettes that suggest that they don't have a lot of self-worth.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what's underlying things. So when they meet Grace, they say, we remember exactly what it's like to be her, alone and awkward on the open prairie of the playground. And earlier they said something about her looks familiar. And then that is echoed. So that her being the outsider, she's suggested as like not fitting in, not being not having a lot of self-worth the way they would describe themselves. And then later on, when we're getting closer to the end, they're talking about Grace after she's changed, this new creature with darkened eyes and sleek clothing. At first, she looks like a stranger, but there's something familiar about her. It's like that same wording, there's something familiar about her when she's becoming more like them. They're not quite recognizing it in themselves. So I think those little moments, I agree with you, you guys, what you said about the plot overall. It is a familiar plot, and we can feel it as if it's stale a lot of times. But there's like little moments like that that's why I said she does it so well. She does do it really well.
Is there anything that you guys would take away from this, or what would you say that we should mimic, or maybe not mimic, but what's a lesson, I guess? The
main lesson that it's the same lesson I pull out of so many different stories, is just point of view. I think I talked about this with I talked about something else for that one, but the alien story when they came to us. But this point of view is handled in a different way than that one is. And it's just demonstrating the point of view. And I've mentioned this in other podcasts. We think of it as being so static, but they're so versatile. It is so immensely versatile. And it's everything for fiction. Like I think Rob mentioned in the Saunders one is like, this is what fiction can do. It can get you into a point of view. The kind of thing that other media can't do. Fiction does it. And that's so just watching a really well executed point of view is kind of neat.
Right. Because had she done this in just like some third person, it would have been a totally different story. Or like from Grace's perspective, obviously would have been a different story. Yeah, she really kind of stretched the limits of this point of view. What about you, Rob?
I would try to, if I'm writing something and I come upon something that's interesting and that feels like an opportunity, meaning like, oh, I came up with something and this could like put the story on a really cool trajectory, but it's either this or it's that, or it's too much this or too much that. I would say, let's go for it. Because I think this writer had an opportunity and then wrote something that was a little tamer, and I would like to spend more time in just that kind of weird, and there's kind of a scary feeling to the first page of the story too, that I'm just kind of realizing now. It was just kind of not off-putting, but it made me feel uncomfortable, but in in a dramatic way.
Yeah,
where is this going?
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Exactly.
More even that, than just where am I? And that's really exciting as a reader when you just feel like you have no compass and you don't know which way to turn. But then to turn into a kind of a more comfortable or sunny direction or whatever was disappointing.
Yeah,
so if you come across the unfamiliar, just like try to go headlong and see what happens.
Yeah. We'll understand Rob's preference for that by the time we read the babysitter story.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. You'll love it.
I guess my takeaway would be that stupid tip that I gave earlier, which is just to piggybacking off what Rob said, like test either your own temperature, but I really enjoy like reading my stuff to someone, or like I'm editing a podcast right now for work and I send it to my sister. And I'm like, I do the same thing you do, John, when you want us to read your novel. You're like, tell me when you got bored. Tell me when you consciously zoned out, and that's when I'll know. That's a good measure of whether you've stumbled upon something like that Rob wants to read in its entirety, or like
I did read
that
this
Rob
in
is
its
going to
entirety.
just shit on for an
Yeah,
entire
right.
episode. So Rob's the barometer. All right, I think this is a good episode. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Doug.